printers in June and July, not just in manga, but across the comics industry, because it looks like there's going to be retail outlets on the other side of it. It's not to say that there won't be a lot of pain. I don't think it's avoidable at this point. But the reorganization at Barnes and Noble last week is a really good indicator of that. And the buyers, we lost Killen, who was a great guy and an amazing buyer, and we lost. Sorry, and so many people got let go of Barnes and Noble. Not just Jim, but Jim's sort of person that I knew there. Beyond that, like, I think we're going to get to see what normal, hard air quotes on normal, looks like in maybe July and August, and that's maybe going to set the tone for what's going to come afterward. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, like, we're all there has to people that run businesses that employ people have to believe that they can continue to do that on some level, even if they have to take steps to mitigate exposure, and those steps cause pain to people. And I think we're going to get an industry, at least for the next year and a half, and it'll be up to people paying attention to social distancing guidelines. It'll be up to people investing, in their staff and in their processes to continue it past that part. I think things can go for a long time on inertia, and I guess we'll see, man. Everybody, about what happens.
No, that's actually a really good point, Chris. Like, one of the things that I've been kind of ranting a bit online about throughout, like, most of this shelter-in-place period has been, like, the situation with labor. And even for a small publisher like mine, it's like, I've got a bit more than a dozen freelancers that I work with, and we have books, scheduled out for another year and a half or so that need to be done. And it's like, given the circumstances, you can't cut these people off, right?
How if you need them to come back?
Exactly. And it's the same thing with the content itself too. You can't cut that off too if you don't want to, maintain those relationships with the Japanese publishers or with the authors as well. So
with the fans here, like, the number one, there's still people mad at Viz for canceling Area 88 26 years ago. Like, I heard it being at a show, repping Viz in even a tiny way. It was just like, why did you cancel Area 88? And it was like, that happened actually when I was 6, so I can't really speak to that. Like, I think recognizing that we have a commitment to people is really good. Johnny, you're still translating. Have you noticed, like, none of the translators I've spoken with have been told to slow down in any way? Is that something that you're getting pushback on, or you're being told to do?
I haven't had anybody tell me that, but I have had products that I've worked on get pushed back. So, like, the project that I did last year, it was supposed to come out, I think, when was it, in like January or February of this year, and now I think it's been pushed to October. And even some projects that I was, like, in line to work on, I didn't get the official go ahead until, like, one thing was also earlier this year. I was supposed to start working on it in like January, and then I think about 3 weeks ago, early in June, I finally got to go ahead. So
I've noticed that I'm doing a project for Oni. It's been pushed out of basically this Christmas because it's such a big project and no one's sure how Christmas is going to go. It's still coming out, but yeah, it's been pushed out, specifically due to, like, worrying about truly soft retail markets. So yeah, I mean, everyone's doing their best right now, and you can't just say, go out and spend as much money as you can to make sure that manga keeps happening. But at the same time, like, there is an absolute cause and effect there. Let's hope for a solid retail season. Christmas.
Actually, that was something I wanted to kind of follow up on. With retailers shutting down for months at the time, and, like, Diamond shutting down for months and things of that nature, how does that affect, like, titles that were supposed to have been released in that period that theoretically were released? Do they just get lost in that situation, or do things get pushed back on the retail side of things, whether you want to or not? How is that affecting you?
I guess it's from what I've seen so far. There's been like a big mix. So and this is also something I've heard from other publishers as well. Titles that are in progress. So, say your One Piece or your Sword Art Online or something like that. That's been, or yeah, Boruto. That's been around for a little while. It's already established. Releasing those books, having those metrics available, yeah, you're not going to get the same numbers that you had, prior to the pandemic, just because some of the stores closed down. But at the same time, once things picked up, you ended up a lot of these businesses, a lot of these retailers ended up quickly coming back to order those books and try to fulfill as many of those orders that they got online as quickly as possible. So actually, one thing that a number of publishers noticed as well, and I actually can say this panned out for us also, is that for a brief period of time, particularly like first week and a half of June, we were actually, manga in general was actually trending a lot higher than it was in February, which is very interesting. But some of that is just pent-up demand, right? On the flip side, where things get really painful, though, launching new titles right now. And that there seems to be a number of factors for that. Doing so during that real cold period of April and May, a Barnes & Noble would normally order X number of copies, but without having that foot traffic for people to be pulling and looking on shelves and sampling, you just don't have the same type of impact retail-wise. And at the same time, we didn't have some of the other channels like Diamond. Is some of that kind of picking up right now? Yes, but it's kind of playing catch up, right? In many ways, even the chains are kind of acting as if they're in Amazon, and I'm not necessarily sure how much Chris and Ajani have had access to look at that type of data, from a channel perspective. Amazon's very important, but you don't get the big wholesale load from Amazon that you get from a BNN or even a Books A Million. Being able to ship out literally thousands of copies, in some cases for some titles, tens of thousands of copies, to a couple of retail chains is very significant. Well, on the flip side, might get like a third of that to Amazon, and they'll just fulfill a lot faster. They'll reorder a lot faster than those chains do. So what you end up seeing is, this really big drop-off. And the scary thing about that, I haven't really gone into too much of this conversation with other publishers, but at least in my opinion, and my perspective is, when you launch a title under these type of factors, no matter how much you may try to push those properties down the line, you may not be given another chance because there's still new books coming out. So it kind of reminds me of certain circumstances that occurred back in 2009, 2010 when I first was working at Vertical, and we were launching titles back then, right after the Lehman shock and borders shut down, and some of those numbers weren't pretty for some of those titles. And strangely enough, a few years later, the customers are like, why aren't these titles available anymore? And they just didn't get a good shot, a good start. And in many cases, particularly in our industry, it's just so dependent on series, that could be a pretty fatal blow.
With that, I kind of want to take a slight turn. We're going to continue kind of this conversation on sales and COVID a little bit, and kind of turn towards digital publishing. That has definitely ballooned a lot in the past few years. And have digital manga sales continued to grow over the past 5 years? Or do they continue to make up the same level of overall sales as they did in 2015? And as part of that question, I guess this is more of like specifically for Ed, but was there any significant change to digital sales over the course of like the lockdown and quarantine?
I don't personally have any numbers there. I can say that my understanding is that digital sales have been flat or with small increases in the manga industry for the last couple of years, but the adherence to new free offerings, it's been actually the new World Jump app, Shonen Jump app, as well as some of the initiatives that Kodansha is undertaking through Comixology and bundle and things like that, more and more people are getting manga through official sources. Unfortunately, that the price needed to be lowered to essentially free to do so. But I think that's all I've got to say on it. But yeah, you guys have more current numbers than me.
I guess I could kind of say the same thing. I don't have access to like a broad span of numbers. I've seen a little bit of the digital side in my past work, but from what I did see, it was sort of flat. Maybe some small increases, but the more important thing is that there's just been more avenues for getting things, and there have been, like an example of Kodansha, they just have been putting out more stuff. It's public information that they want to have this big push to get like a huge number of manga out into the Western market, and they've been, how long has it been going on? Probably a little bit after I started, so at least for the past 5 years. And of course, with things like with this, what they did with the app that they released last year, and other things, it's just more manga in general, like through legal means, of course. So.
Yeah, I totally in line with the other two guys on this. From what I've seen as well, ebook sales have seen steady little growth, but it's been pretty flat. Maybe a couple percentage points here and there, but the majority of what people tend to consume, at least what they tend to pay for, tends to be in paper. And has COVID changed some of that? It's really hard to tell in regards to ebooks, in my opinion. There is no book scan for ebooks that's really easily accessible or something comparable. But just for us, we're getting a little bit of an uptick. Not enough to offset the lost sales, or for the last couple of months, or break even in operation costs or like that. It's nice to get some more sales, and it's nice to see that this is an improving option for people. But this isn't exactly the same type of situation that we saw in Japan, say after 3/11, the tsunami, and a lot of people switching over to digital over there. We haven't seen that yet over here yet.
Seems like there was I feel like there's been a lot of hope that it would happen here, but it hasn't caught on in the way people would like it to. I don't know if that's fair to say.
Yeah. I mean, I feel Chris is right in regards to like the Shonen Jump app and Manga Plus app that Shueisha is also doing. Like those are big hits, but and Japan is definitely taking notice of both, but they're also pretty close to free.
Yeah, the most money you're spending there is $2 a month.
So splitting that over I don't know how many series. And, obviously there's a lot of volume, but
there's a lot of worry that that's not replicable. That works because Shonen Jump is such a strong and one of the strongest brands in the world. You maybe can't do that with most other brands. A lot of people think one of my favorite anecdotes about what people know about manga, the readership, is that he would have license requests all the time when he worked for Vertical about things that he should go after, and he would always get people recommending licenses that he already published in English. I think that there's so many layers of disconnect there between knowing what's actually legally available, knowing who publishes the things in English that are legally available that you only maybe know from Scanza or in Japanese. To be charitable. So I think Jump works, and I don't know of literally any other manga brand that could translate into the American market the same way.
Well, a lot of that is there's been a conscious effort to market Jump as a brand in North America, at least for 20 years now.
That's paying off.
Yeah. It eventually has paid off into the fact that it's probably the only one most people know.
Right. Mm-hmm. To just bounce that back to you, Pat, do you think it'd be interesting if Viz hadn't shut down Shoujo Beat, or if Shonen Sunday wasn't something that they obviously announced in the late aughts but didn't necessarily have the same type of push as Jump?
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know numbers or anything, but I think Shoujo Beat is probably is an interesting case because it does seem like there has been a conscious effort across a number of publishers to put out much more shoujo titles out digitally. And I don't know if that's paid off in any meaningful way, but I do think there is something noticeable of there was a time period where shoujo made up a very large portion of what was published in English, and it doesn't in print, and it doesn't feel like it makes up anywhere near as large a portion as it used to. And I'm not sure what that shift would be or why that shift happened.
I have nothing to back this up, but I do think it would be very interesting to have a kind of Netflix style while you can consume shoujo app or something like that. Just looking at like requests and sometimes the anger of shoujo fans out there for not really putting out as much content as they can consume. It seems like there's an opportunity there, but I'm just not sure why it hasn't been done yet, or if something's in the works. Who knows?
Mostly combination of sexism and marketing. Graphic. Shonen Jump is successful for sure, but it is not. The app is not like an unqualified mega, unstoppable Disney Plus type success. And that's with appealing pretty clearly to both to across the spectrum of genders and to across the spectrum of ages as well. Shoujo Beat would be something that was very consciously aimed at women who deserve space in manga and deserve this material to be published and treated well. But do you survive on a third of the Shonen Jump numbers if that was what was happening? Could you survive on less? And these are things that aren't happening in Japan either. Like there's no World Jump. We'll have some Shonen and Seinen titles, but there's not a lot of huge numbers of Shueisha shoujo titles that aren't being pushed in digital in the same way in an international effort. So maybe it's steps. Maybe you gotta get a foothold with your most popular item and then follow it up. I don't know. It'd be something that would be great. It'd be something that would be great to see for sure, though.
I mean, I think in the same vein, it is interesting to see, at least digitally, publishers like, or new online publishers like Mutekia do that with BL, right? On another very niche type of genre, Faku doing that with Ero manga, right? So it's not as if there aren't opportunities for specific type of genres or segments of the market. At the same time, Chris is right. Like, I don't think for either case, and I can even speak for Faku, it's like, they do good. They do pretty good, but they're not big numbers. It's you're really fragmenting, taking up little pieces out of a pie that, well, it feels big, isn't particularly digital isn't as big as we might think.
That's true.
And I actually think that's a perfect way to segue into kind of the next point here, and that is, what do you think are the most significant changes in this moment that have allowed for more publishers to move into this space?
Ed, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like Japanese publishers are loosening the reins a little bit in terms of what they will or won't allow and who they will or won't work with. It's been my understanding from people. I'm close to Peter and Jocelyn, in particular, the Magician A, which was like an manga sort of project that they did, and this is a publisher in Japan that had never licensed a book to America before. Everything had to be done from basically scratch, but they were still willing to do the work, and I think that is really heartening and exciting, and definitely not how things have always been.
No, I totally agree with you. It's interesting, at least from my perspective. Obviously, I just started out my own line a couple of years ago too, and let's just kind of take a step back with that. It's not as if I wasn't around the industry, so these publishers knew me to an extent, but for them to basically trust me with brands that are kind of known, whether it's something like Gundam or Fate Stay Night or even some of the titles from Kodansha, it's like, I honestly would not have felt that would have been the case even 5 years ago. I can tell you, when I was working at Vertical for those first couple of years, that was not the case when I was working at Vertical. Like, I worked at Kodansha prior to that, in Japan, which gave me a leg to get into some of those licenses because I literally knew we were working on them. But working with Shabakon never happened while I was there. Working with Shueisha, we had to go through France to do that. Some of those introductions just took time to happen, and some of that's because of what was happening in the aughts. And there were too many publishers back then. Some people might say. I wouldn't necessarily say that myself, but maybe there was too much content for the market. The fans won't say that, though. But at the same time, once we hit, the Lehman shock, we experienced exactly what Chris described earlier, and it was we had some of these publishers back then had to release all this stuff, and they weren't selling as well. And then you had a situation like a Tokyo Pop or Bandai or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, comics, DR Master, that had all these licenses and couldn't really release all of them. They couldn't. On top of that, couldn't pay out royalties for those titles, and that's why you had a big shift on the publishing side, on the production side. And I do feel it is easier, and it's actually pretty cool. It's a weird situation for me too, because I saw this happening in the teens in Europe, particularly in places like Spain and Turkey and Poland, a little bit in Italy. Now to kind of see it come, and actually even South America, like Brazil and Argentina, now to see that kind of take full circle and come back to the States has been eye-opening, particularly because of the timing. I mean, like I said, I just started working on this a couple of years ago myself, and then to see so many other publishers come right behind me is pretty cool. I hope they can all survive this, though.
Yeah, I don't know. Limiting your exposure with digital manga is not a bad strategy. When the distribution and the supply chain is like the biggest worry I have about the future of manga is like physically putting books in hands, and publishing in general is physically putting books in the hands of people who want them, not just ceding the entire market to Amazon to do so, because they're the last ones standing, who their own machinations. I think that's a really complicated. There's so much nuance to this question, but everyone survives, and I do worry that distribution is much more of a big problem than just too much content that are planning to distribute digitally have a forgo, and people putting things in a print deliberately, publishing deliberately, making deliberate choices. I think.
What about from the production end of things? Like, has that changed in any significant way that's made it easier for companies to get into this space? Beyond just the ease of digital publishing versus worrying about print?
Do you mean like in regards to translation, or
really the whole production line?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think this has really changed, but there's definitely been more work done through like agencies from when I started to in the past 3 years. That's just my limited experience working with Kodansha and some other companies that they're been more reliant on agencies to kind of push out the digital releases or kind of to get things done quickly and cheaper. And I think that's oiled the machine, I guess, to get things going. But I'm not sure how significant that's really been. It's just I've noticed that it's resulted in there being more things, or allowed for more things to happen. But I'm not sure if it's really allowing for a lot of really new, exciting things to come out. So,
do you feel that's been a positive in general, having more agencies involved, John?
My opinion is no. I feel. I guess it is I think it's another cook in the kitchen, I feel, and it's someone else to kind of separate the degrees between the actual person who's making this, or like a translator or a letterer, to the people who are getting these things or soliciting these things or whatever. And the focus probably isn't as much on quality, though things have improved over time. I think just because there have been some mistakes made in the past, and you can't get around those mistakes, but there's still a lot of issues with that. And from a translator or a letter, someone like me, like I haven't actually worked with those places firsthand, just as an editor, and kind of having to go through them to get to people. But it doesn't sound like a very happy existence for like those translators and things. Like a lot of them are uncredited, for example, because they're NDAs that they make them sign, and they're not allowed to mention that they translated any of these titles, and that prevents them from getting out there and doing more work or having like building a resume. So yeah, that's messed up, I think, and feels like it should be kind of illegal, but I don't know what the actual legality of that is. So I hope things improve with that.
You were mentioning like even letterers now being brought in through agencies as well, or?
Oh yeah, they're definitely it's equal. Like the letterers and translators, only in my experience, people that we or haven't seen hired direct through an agency are like proofreaders and people like that, or like people who work on like graphic design for like the covers and stuff. But the letters and translators mainly have been coming in through that. It's not always ideal to do that. I think like given a choice, the publishers I work with don't want to go through an agency, but there are a lot of different people involved, and maybe on the Japan side, or maybe someone else who's involved in like a subsidiary or something like that wants to use that company, or it's something that already existed. There's already a relationship there, and then you have to keep using that agency, and they get those letterers and translators from there.
Yeah, I assume that. Well, I mean, I don't think any of us have. I don't think any of us have been part of those agencies. So maybe even the wages and the like are not quite as what some of these talents would get if they work directly with a publisher.
I mean, I don't know the absolute bottom, but I've heard some pretty, like, almost like peanuts. Like it might as well be for free sometimes. I think they might be targeting scanlators, and it's kind of like, well, you did this for free anyway, so we can pay you a little bit, and you can do this, or trying to kind of cut corners and do like both at the same time. Like I've seen ads on Craigslist from one or two of these agencies that are asking for people who can do both translating and lettering in Photoshop for like a price that probably doesn't seem so bad, but when you're doing both jobs, it's actually pretty cheap.
And it kind of reminds me of like the early days of anime streaming, where a lot of those guys are doing everything, timing and translating and typesetting.
Oh, that's early days. I keep hearing stories about that happening now.
Yeah, I was gonna say a little early.
All right, wow, some things never change.
Once you hit that's one of the scary things with these types of situations is once you find the new bottom, you want to stick to that new bottom. And it gets harder to get past that again, and you end up with a lot of people kind of stuck there, which is a scary thought when you're trying to grow an industry.
I do have a little bit of hope. I think I've seen some letters and translators who kind of made it to the other side, trying to support other people who are gotten into these situations and trying to help people get into the industry in the regular way to be associated with a publisher directly instead of going through agencies. But it'll take time. But I think that's a kind of the benefit of things like social media, like Twitter and things, where people can put a spotlight on these not so great situations. So
we should probably recognize how hard it is to talk about kind of stuff too. Everyone I know that translates manga deeply loves manga. Loves manga more than I do, and I love manga. And to talk about real situations in the industry, like not only is that jobs and work that you want to do, also really worrisome because anytime any founded criticism of the North American manga industry comes to light, there'll be people in the comments, showing up specifically to say, this is why I don't support, air quotes, official releases, because piracy is this specter that's deliberately undermines so much of the work that gets done. So I have a lot of respect for those conversations, but at the same time, it would be great It would be great. It could be great if more work was done.
It could be great.
Absolutely agree with that, and especially the passion of everyone who works in manga from top to bottom is something I haven't really seen in other industries, and that's what is a great thing, but also can be a bad thing when that's taken advantage of, unfortunately. But I hope we can have more kind of honest conversations in the industry, and I have to kind of tiptoe around a lot of these things. That would be nice.
Well, hopefully these are things we can discuss more together online. I mean, offline, I should say. Because if it's tough to bring it out, in some cases, to the public, obviously wages and things like that are really always hard. But I feel that there are opportunities to discuss some of this with, obviously amongst the translator community, the letterer community, and maybe reach out and bring that up within editorial as well.
I know for a fact that that's happening behind the scenes. So
I want to circle back to something that Chris had mentioned a little bit, or alluded to, and that's kind of like the consolidation of storefronts and retailers and Amazon becoming a huge part of like the retail space and especially like the digital marketplace as well, and discuss a little bit about how do you solve or ideas around solving the discoverability issue for digital manga and digital manga sales as more publishers are trying to publish titles digital only. How do you get exposure for them when your marketplace is largely, for most people, Amazon and maybe Comixology, which is also Amazon?
And I bet every manga publisher wishes they knew the answer to that question.
I figure let's go with the hard ones.
Here's the thing I've noticed. I can't address that all the way, but here's the thing I've noticed. Anything that gets published or promoted as being, outside of the bounds or pushing the boundaries of manga is maybe what I want to say, does not get ordered the same way, with the same numbers as something that is published in sound, by the text on the back of the book, which is what, and a comp or two, which is what most retailers get. Anything that is outside of the ordinary gets ordered less, and anything that sounds like it's more of the same gets ordered more. And because I think a lot of people are in the position to buy, whether that's nationally or internationally or even locally at a store, don't have significant level of investment in the knowledge of what manga is and how to sell it and how to order it and why. I think a lot of publishers play that game too, is that I think a lot of publishers put out a lot of work that is very similar to other work that they put out, hoping for the sales to hit the same way. If you're a publisher that's trying to publish, like Denpa is, different kinds of books that reach different kinds of audiences, and positioning your work that way, you're not going to get the same level of attention as you might otherwise. That's a hard thing, because it is so discouraging from wanting to publish more nuanced or complicated series. The only things that get exempted from that are things that are tied to really clear book category or movement categories. So we used to call them issues books back in the 90s and aughts, early 2000s. So I think that's a real tough thing to hear, is that your buyers want more of the same and will punish you for not giving it to them. And you kind of have to sneak things under the radar. Like Chat Atelier is something that I became really intimately familiar with because Shirahama Sensei was supposed to come to TCAF this year, and then cancel TCAF and no one was public anyway. Like, that is a book that is, I don't say this lightly, but is maybe Otomo level in terms of artistic quality. I think Shirahama is doing something that is transformative and is going to echo for the next decades. Maybe people are sleeping on it a little bit because it, get it into stores. You can't go out and say we're the new, especially if you're Kodansha, this is the new Otomo or something like that. People are being like, oh, it's a good story, it's kind of Harry Potter-ish, it's kind of this, it's kind of that, and it's like, that person is maybe one of the best artists working in manga. These are like anecdotal, and I get that, but these are conversations that are happening at every sales and marketing team and editorial. They affect the acquisitions process, they affect editing, they affect every part of manga publishing. is how do we get people to understand what these books are, or to order them, or to know about them? That's the answer. And then the other answer is, will they get them? Because distribution is a series of cascading nightmares. Is unaddressable because it's outside of your control. That's what I had to say on the topic. I'm sorry, that was really long, but you guys, like, what do you think?
Well, I just want to say one quick thing that I'm glad that Wish I was one of those things that for a new title did relatively well, and I think we all wanted it to do that well. By the way, I was the editor on.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh my god, that was so piercing. I'm sorry.
I was the editor until I left Kodansha. That's so like volume 5, I think. Yeah. And it before I left, I think it hit its 3rd or 4th printing. So it did pretty well, and I think that was a pleasant surprise for everyone.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in regards to Chris is right in regards to discoverability, but taking that additional step for like digital distribution, which I think is what Pat was asking about. It gets a lot more fragmented, right? Go on to a Netflix, go on to a YouTube, or Amazon Prime. Like, it's almost impossible to search for things, really. The algo tries to recommend things, but that doesn't necessarily always work for everybody or anybody, I kind of feel. And on top of that, the amount of fragmentation there is for manga in regards to, so some things are on Comixology and some things are not on Kindle for whatever reason, or vice versa. Some things are on Bookwalker, but you can only find them there. Some things are on iTunes or Kobo. There's for the customer, I'm sure it's really frustrating. It may be even more frustrating than going to a store and not seeing volume 3 out of a 12-volume series, but yeah, it's particularly in the fact that you expect that the internet's gonna just give you a result, and that's not always going to be the case. I feel some publishers are experimenting with things like free first volumes or $1 first volumes, and Chris mentioned earlier Humble Bundle. That's something I tried when I was at Vertical, and I was interested. I didn't necessarily bring new customers to new series that often. I honestly don't know. Outside of consistently bringing down the value of our content, which is frustrating.
Weird time to be writing this panel. On this panel.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's a tricky time frame. So why don't we take a little bit of a swing? We've talked a little bit about publishers, like new publishers kind of moving into the space, doing digital sales, things of that nature, and how part of what might have been changing has been Japanese publishers' willingness to work with people. And I think this is something that you, Chris, and Ed probably more can speak to, are you finding it harder to find titles that fit into niches in the market that you're looking to target, that are licensing and profitable, while being able to break away from larger publishers like Shueisha or Kodansha, who have much bigger hands in the North American market?
Yeah, actually, I think maybe Ajani can talk about that too, since he's moved from Kodansha to Vertical now.
Oh, yeah, true.
But I guess in my case, it's I don't find it hard at all. But that's just because, like, I think both Ajani and Chris fall in the same mindset that we read all kinds of shit. So like for me, yeah, I love Denpa's not tied up to any specific publisher, but could I go talk to Shogakukan or Kodansha or Kadokawa? All of them have subsidiaries. Yeah, I could easily do that. At the same time, I'm acquiring things from publishers that hardly get anything in English, like Oda Books or Shodensha or Takeshobo. So there's quality out there. At the same time, yeah, just like Chris said, not not everything that is popular in Japan is going to be popular here, and there is a lot of homogeneity in regards to what we see in general be successes here. But I don't know. At least in my case, it's not that I don't care about those numbers, but it's like, yeah, our expectations are very different. Not every book has to be a 30,000 unit seller. You know, if we're doing okay here we're breaking even with all of our books, we're doing fine. So, yeah, that's kind of our mindset with that.
I think the part about the expectation is really important. I think for my transition from working at Kodansha and putting a Random House to going to Vertical, that has been something that's been more freeing to be in a place where, yeah, I don't have to expect to sell 30,000 for something. So something being profitable from the perspective of Kodansha Comics versus Vertical are very different things. And I can, the profit, even for Vertical, I won't understand that until something I've pitched can get licensed. And right now that's kind of all on hold. But just in conversations that I've had, I've been able to look at things that were probably just like a no-go or things that I have pitched and were definitely like, nope, not happening. But at Vertical, I've been welcomed a little more warmly. And so at least from that perspective, it seems like there's a lot of positivity and there's the things that I can do. But we'll have to see what happens in the future as far as like, are these things that can be profitable? I mean, I think they'll fit a certain target audience, definitely, and being with a smaller publisher allows us to kind of hit those, whereas you're kind of trying to hit a wide target at a larger company. So I think that's just one thing to say about it.
Yeah, I think that those are both exactly right. It really is about expectations going into a project. Just a little bit of inside baseball, like there's a whole, there's often, real sales numbers that are submitted, like how many copies are going to be printed to the Japanese licensors. They know, and most American companies pay up front on that. They're not paying royalties after the fact unless it goes into multiple printings. So everyone along the process is really aware of what the expectations are to work with a publisher, to work, and for each individual project. It's not going to earn out. That's on the publisher to handle. But if it's too low, then they don't accept the offer. They don't want to work with that publisher. I think that does mean to make those again anecdotal, but you get to like really clear decisions and indicate what you want to do, and that is the biggest impact around what gets licensed, levels of profitability. Maybe.
Do you kind of feel that from experience when you were at Viz, Chris, or?
This is a whole other kettle of fish,
yeah, right?
And not in a bad way, and not in a good way. Like it's just very, very different. This is, I assume most people listening to this podcast know that this is co-owned by Shueisha and Shogakukan. So there's real give and take between Viz editorial and Japanese editorial and published, and what I think everyone there works really hard, and again really loves manga. Sometimes it's just doing an international push for this new title, so we would like all of our, we would like everyone to be on board with that. And sometimes it's like, really, you want that one out of the catalog? Okay, well, I guess. Sure, you don't want this other thing. And, sometimes it's just, you don't hear it all. It's just you send off a contract and it comes back with no comments and you have no idea. But, it's, every book is licensed in sort of its own way. And even, you can't necessarily make generalizations in groups. I will say that it's like Junji Ito's move are really interesting because that's been under the sort of party of one editor for a really long time. They've built up a really strong relationship with Ito Sensei. I think that's a really great example of international cooperation on a manga, really understanding what both parties need in order for a book or a series of books to be a success. And it helps that you can market each one of Ito's books both as a series and as a starting point for the most part, because they're all done as like bind-ups, 2-in-1, 3-in-1, etc. So it's just a great example of something that was like, that took a long, long time from the first time the first chapter of Uzumaki appeared in pulp to, Longer Human coming out couple of months ago. That relationship to turn into what it is, but it is a good relationship. It's an example of just one way that works at the company. And then it's, there's any myriad number of ways, especially like I pitched the Transformers manga. Like that was, again, another publisher that had never licensed a book to North America, and that the Transformers stuff had specifically never been reprinted anywhere in the world. So that was like a whole different situation than the Shogakakon to get the new next Ito, and working with Ito to make sure he was happy, Ito Sensei to make sure he was happy. And yeah, so like, it's different for not necessarily every project, but for most projects, the experience is very different.
Yeah. I just want to say that Transformers comic coming out was buck wild. As a Transformers guy. But we're coming close on time, and I have one or two questions I want to hit before we leave. Just because I feel like we should, I don't know, like address fan translation on some level, because I guess people expect you to in these kind of panels. But I'm curious, like, how do titles having fan translations out in the wild impact your plans? Like, widely, from title selection to the way they're translated. Do they impact what you want to do at all? Like, how do those things factor into your plans and how you work?
Maybe I can start, since mine probably won't be as extensive as the others. But so as an editor before, it didn't really affect things that much, because when I was looking for titles, I'm looking at the Japanese source directly and just trying to figure out trends and just reading the actual magazine chapters and those things. And so before I go any further, that's the first thing I do. Where it has, in my experience, affected things is if there are a title that I pitch and then it already is not off to a good start, and maybe there's some pushback on it. And once or twice in my career, I've gotten the excuse that it's a good title, but probably because it's scanlated so much, everyone who is going to read it, everyone who's going to buy it, has already bought it, or already read it in scanlation. And that's disappointing to see, and it has an effect there. Like, there might have been a really interesting title, but because it's been scanlated so heavily, and it doesn't seem as profitable as maybe some other titles, it has less of a chance. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that titles that are difficult, which I've kind of been alluding to in the panel, are more hurt by scanlation, because they're seen as less surefire hits. So, it's just another, in the pro-con statement, it's just another entry in the cons column, licensing a title that's already a marginal or difficult or, not, or exciting or unique, or, not just words that are, it's a tough situation, and it definitely negatively impacted things I brought to the table, for sure. Things that were going to be successful anyway, that had a built-in audience, translation played less of a role in deciding whether or not it would be translated. So that's the extent of my...
Yeah, I'm totally in the same line with Ajani in regards to this. Historically, I've just looked at magazines and gotten recommendations from publishers and editors, and haven't really paid that much attention to scans and scan groups or aggregators or whatever, wherever people get their info on scans. So at the same time, can a title be impacted by scanlations? Maybe. There's really no easy way to figure that out, to be honest. A lot of this is anecdotal, but it is kind of interesting to be in the position where you release books that haven't been available apparently, and then eventually end up seeing, oh hey, even your promotional material is available online, and now bundled with those books. It's curious, right? And maybe sometimes your numbers start to not die off, but maybe fade. But that doesn't necessarily make me balk at going after a title, but it on the opposite end, it's maybe there is a little bit more of a correlation long term than people may expect. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's that easy to prove.
When you go to license title, do you actually check to see if it's been scanlated already? Or is that something that's just irrelevant to your decision?
Not at all for me. I don't even bother checking. Now, I will say that, like, I would, back in, I would say maybe my third, fourth year when I was at Vertical, so I was doing acquisitions a year, about almost a year out was when I started doing acquisitions. And, those first couple titles that we had over there were a little dicey, and one of them, well, actually two out of the four hit, and so I was kind of looking at, like, okay, what's available on manga updates and what are the numbers here. Not necessarily being in a situation where, like, hey, if you have something in the top 10, which still tends to kind of be a lot of webcomming from Korea for whatever reason, it's like, most of that stuff actually tends to be stuff that's available in English already, like Berserk or One Piece or random long form shoujo titles. So there really, I don't know, there really wasn't too much of a point to try to do that. On top of that, another thing I did kind of do. So we did do some surveys, and I would occasionally kind of compare a lot of submission information from those surveys to what was popular on places like Manga Updates. And what was interesting, even under those circumstances, was that for certain titles that did trend well on surveys, like What Did You Eat Yesterday? Those things did really well on places like Manga Updates, but didn't sell well. So that might go back to what Ajani was saying. And maybe if things are a little more fringe, you're kind of putting yourself at, or putting those titles at risk. Don't have too many examples of that, because even back in my Vertical days, we weren't releasing a lot of content, but we do have a couple of. I have had a couple of examples of that kind of panning out that way, which I found really interesting.
Well, one final question. I think this is mostly for Ed, but the others feel free to chime in. I think everyone needs to know, is there something about the mangoes from Cebu that really higher quality than those from India?
Oh man,
that's a really good question, and we fleshed out a lot better in Guava No Holiday by Campania, coming soon from Denpa book. But I would say Cebu mango tend they have a bit more of a they're not, they don't necessarily fall apart. Enjoy them for its mango. And not to say that Indian mango is not great. I got to go to a Comic-Con in India a few years ago, and Indian mango is amazing. But
aren't there many? No, there are like a bunch of different types of Indian mango, aren't there?
Indian mango or Indian manga?
Are you talking about mango? Because we're talking about mango, I can talk about the fruit.
I'm kind of crossing over between the two, but within the comics over there, yeah, there's an interesting comic scene in India.
Oh, okay.
But when you're talking about the fruit, yes, the food in India is also quite varied. I will say Cebu mango are very tasty.
That's great to hear. And I think on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our discussion. So thank you everyone for joining us at KuroCon. Before we go, if you three would like to promote anything or say anything, any final thoughts?
I think I just, pimped Guava No Holiday. So if you're looking for a very indie style of manga from literally one of the darlings of the Japanese doujinshi scene, Pampania, give that a shot. Interesting thing about that title too is it's part cookbook, part travelogue, part surreal comedy biography. Pretty indicative of what we are trying to do at Denpa, and kind of like what Chris has said. Not your standard type of title. Possibly gonna feel a little bit more pain than those, but well worth releasing.
And Chris?
Oh, I'm good. I offer love and support to people going through tough stuff right now. The whole industry, it's kind of hurting a little bit, and everyone in their way. So, good luck. Stay safe, everyone.
What are the situations with the con for next year? Is it still? I assume it's still up in the air, right?
Be determined.
And Ajani?
I don't have a book to promote right now. I guess not the time when they're actually out, but I do want to say that for the future of the industry, one of my hopes is that there'll be more diversity in a lot of different ways, not only in titles, which things have been getting more diverse over time, and I'm happy to see that. I think there could be a better balance of more interesting titles, and I'm happy to be in the room with people who support that. And then also just in fact the actual people who run the business. There's been a lot that's going on in the world that's kind of bringing things into question, and I hope that there'll be more room for people like me who kind of made it in. But I think there is more room and more diversity of thought and things that could be brought into this industry. So I want to do that, and if you're interested and have the means to do that, then please get in contact with me. So thank you.
Yeah, and so again, thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of KuroCon.